Hello and welcome to Question Time. I'm Omkar Goswami. At my age, I occasionally get the chance of interviewing some of my favorite students who I taught at different points of time. Today is one such. I'm not only interviewing a very good student of mine at the Delhi School of Economics long ago, which is almost telling my and my guest's age, but also a person who is an expert on a really hot topic, which is the Supreme Court judgment and the 2G auctions. He has been following telecom for a long time. Meet Sunil Jain, opinion editor of the Financial Express. Sunil, thank you very much for getting
Thanks,
on the
Omkar.
show. Sunil, not too many people have actually read the judgment in detail, even though it's not a very large judgment.
Yeah, 81 odd pages.
Yeah, it's not, and 81 double-space pages, so it's not a large judgment. So let's go through this, because I want to discuss with you in the course of this interview two aspects of the judgment, and we have to be careful because we're talking about a Supreme Court judgment. One is whether auctions are the only way to distribute indivisible resources or resources, natural resources of the state, and whether alternate methods are absolutely wrong. And second, given the judgment, what happens to people who have started the business? How many of them may be harmed for no fault of theirs? I think these are two critical questions that need to be answered. So let's start with auctions. The Supreme Court raised four sets of questions, if you remember. One is, does the state have the right to distribute natural resources? And if so, what is the most fair way of doing it? And along with it was that the second and third questions were, was the fairness of the way as determined by the Supreme Court vitiated by the processes? And therefore, is there a case for quashing whatever happened in 2G auctions, right? So let's start with auctions. Is it the only way?
No, it's not the only way, but the larger point here, I would say, is not about, the Supreme Court has sort of taken it to be the only way. I think the Supreme Court is wrong, it's not the only way. But the larger point that the Supreme Court is making is that the government of India has to have a fair process. I'll give you an example of what I mean. In between 2003 and 8, the Supreme Court, one of the arguments made by the lawyers was that if first come, first served is a bad idea, then first come, first served has to be a bad idea for all licenses between 2003 and 8. So Supreme Court has said we'll look at that. If somebody was to petition, we'll look at that. Now the point is, between 2003 and 8, if you look at the bulk of those licenses, I think there were about 54 odd licenses given out. If you look at the bulk of those licenses, there weren't that many people asking for those licenses. So you could make an argument that first come, first served never really made much of a financial loss to people. There were just one or two people asking for those licenses. I gave it to them. In 2008, the big difference was there were 570 odd people looking for 122 licenses.
Let me ask, so now what you're saying, Sunil, is that between 2003 and 2008,
that's right,
when we did follow first come, first served policy, there were not that many people, and therefore there was no harm.
I'm saying there's less of a harm.
Or less harm in issuing it on a first come, first served. But if there is a large number of people applying for a scarce natural resource, which is owned by the state for the benefit of the people and owned by the state on behalf of the people, then it must follow a better process. Now let me just take the case of something which is a scarce resource. Water is as scarce a resource as spectrum, and for many people I would say it's a scarcer resource, right? Have you seen anywhere in India a case being made where water connections need to be auctioned?
It depends on the kind of auction we're talking about, Omkar. Now, if you look at the telecom auction has been one where I say that I will pay 100 crores, you say I'll pay 101, you win the bid. So you keep ratcheting it up and we come to a figure of, let's say 1 lakh crores that happened in the 3G auctions. The other kind of auction could be not about money. It's like you look at the Delhi airport. In the Delhi airport, the auction was on how much of the revenue that you get, will you give it to me? If you look at the oil fields, I know oil is not water. In fact, the two don't mix. But if you look at oil fields, Mukesh Ambani won it. There were certain technical qualifications. So we don't want just everybody bidding for it. We assume that the company has a certain technical qualification. So you and I both are technically qualified. We bid. And I say, I will give you 3% of whatever I earn. You say 5%. No, it's an auction, but it's not an auction based.
I'm going to push you. I'm going to take you back to economics.
Oh God, yeah.
And this is not about the Supreme Court judgment. I'm going to take you back to basic economics, which is let's take the case of water. One of the things you want to do is to have everyone to have access to a minimal amount of water, right?
Yes.
Just as you presumably would want everyone to have access to a minimal amount of telephony, right?
Absolutely.
Now, if you want everyone to have access to a minimal amount of water, do you think auctioning water connections is a way of doing it?
No, you don't auction the water connection. What you do is you auction it to the licensee. So it's between you and I. We are the two companies who are going to provide water to all of Delhi, and we give it to you and I. So one way to say that, okay, Omkar, how much will you pay for the license? And you say 1,000 crore, I say 500, you get it. The other way to do it is say, Omkar, how much of the money that you earn from these people will you give to me? And by the way, I'm laying down preconditions, and my preconditions say you will not charge more than 50 paisa a bucket. So the government has put a tariff.
Didn't you do economic history with me?
And I probably failed it. So
no, you did quite well. I remember right. So do you remember the cases that we looked at of revenue farming, where the Mughal emperor, or thereafter the English East India Company, when it had the Diwani of Bengal, would do revenue farming, where it would farm out revenues to the highest bidder? And what was the outcome of revenue farming? The outcome of revenue farming is that the highest bidder would then charge a very high price for each of the ryots, the peasants below them, in order to recover their costs.
Yeah, but Omkar, you know, you're absolutely right. I'm glad. I mean, you remember the history. I don't. But that's why you were the teacher, I was the student. But I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. You take the highways here. In the highways, the government of India has laid down certain rules. They say that no car of a certain size, this is the maximum tariff that you can charge. So you put a ceiling, you make sure that the person who wins the contract doesn't milk people. You can also say, like you do in the case of telecom, that I want 10% of your connections to be in rural areas. So, for example, if you're looking at water, you could say that I want these many Jhuggi Jhopdi colonies to have water. I demand as a quality of service that there must be 6 hours of running water. I demand that this must be... and then having said, put all those conditions, you say, let's bid Sunil.
You're saying, here are all the constraints that I will put in.
There was an economic term for this, right?
Yes, there are constraints. There are a bunch of constraints that I will put in. One of them is for the poor section. Let's take the case of water. One of them is for the poor sections. One of them is for how much minimum water people must get. One of them is how much water must be there on a regular basis, quality for how many hours, the quality of service.
And tariff.
And that it cannot be above a certain tariff subject to negotiations. Based on that, you bid. Okay. Now, so let me give you an example of that.
Okay, okay, you take me back to my D school days, which is a long time.
I want to take you, because you see, I'll tell you what is a little bothersome about an otherwise good Supreme Court judgment. Is this non-economist love for certitude on matters of economics, and the certitude being auction is the best thing.
It's like it's a motherhood statement.
Right. And I'm just sitting and talking to you and challenging the motherhoodness of that statement.
I agree, but that's something that there are ways to design auctions which try and take into account these other factors you're talking about.
Now, so now we also know in auctions, and this has happened several times, of the winner's curse, where in order to get a scarce resource, a disproportionate amount of a scarce resource, typically indivisible, I overpay in order to be a sure winner, and then I'm not able to figure out a business model that repays that cost, right? And we know that the new NTP, the new telecom policy of 1999, done by Jaswant Singh, had to deal with winner's curse.
Absolutely.
So what about that?
You know, you're absolutely right, but the good thing about I mean, a winner's curse is something which these people have to look into. And obviously, if the bid goes very high, we do have a problem. Let me put it to you another way, because there's economics, which is clearly, you know, which we need to keep in mind. There's also corporate ethos. You look at in 2003 or 2001 when the bids took place, the pan-Indian bid was for about $250 million. 1,600 crores is what Bharti and these kind of people paid for an all-India license. When Vodafone came and they bought Hutch, they paid about 50 times that amount. So they paid about $11 to $12 billion. I think you can't get more of a winner's curse, you know, quote-unquote winner's curse than that. You paid $11 billion for a company for which, you know, people like Bharti paid much less. What happened after that? Vodafone didn't go bust. Vodafone didn't jack up the tariffs either. Obviously what happened was that Vodafone shareholders decided that we're going to amortize this, or we're going to get this money back over a longer period. We thought that we'd get it back over 5 years or 10 years. I think it's now going to be 20 years. Let's say for the sake of argument that Vodafone did go bust. Okay, this was a bad deal which Vodafone got into. They went bust. So what would happen? Vodafone has paid $11 billion to Hutch. Hutch has gone, taken the money. Vodafone now says we can't work this business. So Vodafone comes to, for the sake of argument, it goes to some private equity guy, or it goes to Bharti for the sake of argument, and Bharti says, listen, the only way that it makes sense for me to run this business if I buy it for you for $3 billion.
Right.
Vodafone
So we're going to take a break.
Yeah.
What you're saying is the winner's curse could be overstated. Right?
Yeah.
But when we come back,
you're going to get me on that.
We're going to come back and discuss more on the auctions. I want to make this very clear, since we are on public television, this is not in any way a critique or demeaning the Supreme Court judgment. This is about one particular aspect which we are discussing. In my case, I have now become an academic rather than an anchor, discussing with an ex-student of mine, which is auction the only way of distributing national resources? We'll take a short break now. When we come back, more on auctions and more on what telecom companies will now need to do. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Question Time, and my guest is Sunil Jain from the Financial Express. Sunil, if you had to do this process, and you said, and you were a believer that it is not to be first come, first serve, though I'm still not sure why that is unambiguously a bad thing.
Yes.
How would you design it?
I would do it the way we did it in 3G, which is that I'd say that we have multi-stage auctions.
Explain that to viewers.
Which basically means that I say, I sort of look and I say, there seem to be a lot of people who want this spectrum. I seem to have a limited amount. So firstly, I think one of the problems with the 3G was that the 3G bid took place when nobody knew how much spectrum was available with the government. So people were starved for spectrum. The government said, okay, here's this amount. People just went and grabbed and they bid whatever they could. And I think we could have what you're talking about.
I think in 3G you probably
I think you will have a winner's curse, absolutely. So what I would say
was crazy bidding.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
it made very good sense to Pranab
it
Mukherjee. He was very happy.
It was great copy for people like me, but I think you will have a problem at some point. So the way that I'd look at it, I'd say that before we get into anything, I want us to know how much spectrum do we have, and I want commitments from everybody that over, let's say, the next 6 months or the next 1 year, this is the amount which is going to be available.
In other words, let's get this clear.
Yeah.
What you want the government.
I am the government now.
You are the government.
Yeah.
So what Sunil Jain as government will say is, this is the amount of spectrum that I will allocate now,
yes,
and this is the amount of spectrum I will allocate 3 years hence or 2 years hence.
Absolutely. So everybody knows how
so
much
that
spectrum
over a
is
period
available.
of time,
Yes.
over a say 10-year period,
Yes.
I will tell you how much spectrum I will allocate.
Now there are two ways that I can do an auction, and I haven't thought about which is better, but I can do it in any of two ways. I can say that it's going to be a 6% flat. You give me 6% of whatever you earn or 8% of whatever you earn, and now let's bid for an upfront.
So it's like auctioning of airports.
Absolutely. No, the airport one was a
revenue share.
Yeah. So this is like saying this is the current 3G auction.
Go ahead.
I've specified my fee, and I want a one-time fee from you. That's one way of doing it. I think we can get into a winner's curse. What I would do is say, listen, this is the amount of spectrum I've got. This is what the roadmap looks like. I want you people to bid on how much of the money you're going to give me. So people can say, one guy will say, I'll bid at 2%, I'll give you 2%. The other guy says 3%. I haven't, thought about which is better, but I'm saying that's the way I would do it. You could say, for example, I want a revenue share basis. That's how we do it in the oil sector. That's how Mukesh Ambani, for example, has got the KGD6. That's how we did it in the airport sector. That's how GM Rao.
Explain that again. So now Omkar knows that there is so much auction available now.
And what I want to make sure is I don't want to rule out people who don't have too much money. So I don't want only the Sunil Mittals of the world to participate in the auction. Because if it's an upfront bid, the guy who's got more money is the guy who's going to win it.
So now, there is someone like a Sunil Mittal who's got lots of money, bless him.
And there's Omkar who's got a little less money.
Who's got a hell of a lot less money.
And I say, listen, I mean, assuming that Omkar can deliver the same quality of services, and he's now stitched together a coalition of people. So he's got Vodafone, he's got 5 people with him. They're going to be good service. I think he's technically qualified. I say, okay, now let's bid on how much of your revenue you're willing to share with me. So Omkar says, Sunil Mittal is very confident. He says, I'm going to give only 4%. Omkar is a bit more aggressive. He wants that bid. He says, I'm going to give you 8. Omkar gets it. So that's the other way of doing it. But I'm saying that in all these processes, you have to have certainty of how much.
And the auction price is going to be the net present value of the revenues that you will share.
No, the revenue, the second auction which I'm talking about is that whatever your revenues are, you will give me 5% or 6%. You will bid as to the amount of that revenue.
But there won't be a stock of money that you will give when you win the auction.
I think that is that is what's going to make sure that only the big guys win. So if we want the smaller guys to come in, you could do that.
But you can do a combination of the two.
You could do a combination. You could have an auction which says that the net result of this auction is going to be that I want one new person to come. So I know in the market today that there is a Sunil Mittal, there is a Vodafone, there are these 4 or 5 people. So I'll say you guys bid for it, but I want one new person to come.
All right. So now here is a question which everyone who works on auction theory knows, that a standard straightforward auction, particularly seal bid auction, is one which is very inefficient.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to get into the economic.
You had that thing about a consumer surplus which doesn't get captured.
It's just inefficient. Yeah. I mean, a seal bid auction is inefficient. Yes. In that framework, an auction that's quite efficient is called the Vickrey auction, which is the highest bidder wins, but pays the second highest bidder's price, and everybody knows that, right? Now, can you ever get that kind of a concept understood in government?
I don't understand it, so I don't know. Omkar, I think you can do it. Because, for example, at one time, the only auction that people understood in India was a sealed bid auction. And then suddenly we got into this multi-stage auction where that you and I put our bids in the morning, and in the evening we got a chance to revise it. And then the next day in the morning we got another chance to revise it. So we moved from one type of auction to another auction. At one time in India, auctions meant only upfront money.
So no, here's my question.
So I think we can.
Instead of going into details, my question to you here is that you think the government has now become suitably sophisticated in understanding that auctions are more complicated than what they thought, and that they should get experts to design auctions for them.
Absolutely, Omkar. In fact, in the 3G auctions, you had experts who were brought in the airport auction. You had experts who were brought in. So the government is a lot more open today to getting outside consultants.
So let's now move away from auctions. So
Omkar, just one quick question here which I have from you. We've finished the first stage.
I'm coming to the second.
Have I passed the first stage?
You've passed.
Oh, thank you.
So what we have agreed is auctions is a typical way. It's not the only way. It need not necessarily even be the best way.
Yes.
But it cannot be summarily dismissed for a first come first serve basis. Yes. And it certainly can't be dismissed for a first come first serve in the manner in which it was done for the 2G.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. That's, I think, fair. Okay. And we are all in the right page. Next is what now? Now, there's one argument that you can always say is that if you bought something from a felon, or you bought something from a guy who was selling stolen goods,
too bad.
Yeah. But a lot of people who bought into the licenses bought into a license which those guys got, and they didn't know that they were stolen goods. So is there a solid case, for instance, of Telenor? I'm not questioning, I'm not saying that Unitech necessarily got it the right way. I am saying there is no reason to believe that Telenor knew that Unitech got it the wrong way if they so did. So why should Telenor be
Okay, we'll get into the caveats later. But in principle, I think the government just has to refund money, because there's a big difference between stolen goods and what happened. Stolen goods is you have a car which you stole from somebody and I took a chance and I bought it, or you picked up a Rembrandt from somebody and I just bought it. But in this case, this is like buying a house. So you sell me your house and I don't trust you, so I go and check the property records maintained by the government of India. And those property records say, yes, the house does belong to Omkar Swamy.
Which is the license.
Which is the license. In this case, Unitech came with a license and they told Telenor, here's the license. It says here government of India, it says here that this is signed by X, and you can go and check with X as to X sign. Telenor went, they looked at the license, and they bought it. So they bought it in good faith. More important, Omkar.
And the license was also completely legal.
Absolutely. And more important, Omkar, this was not the only stage where the government got in. The government then gave Telenor 4 or 5 other permissions, in fact more permissions after that, based on the same license. So even if you assume that Telenor knew or thought that there could be a problem with that license, Telenor then went and invested 10,000 crore rupees after that, based on further assurances or guarantees or, things which the government of India gave. So I think Telenor has a very, very good case. In fact, all these guys have a good case for asking for compensation. Having said that, now the caveats. Should Telenor get 1,600 crore rupees, which is what the government got from Unitech, or that share of that? Or should Telenor get, let's say, the 15,000 or 10,000 crores?
That it paid Unitech.
That it paid Unitech
and spent.
And that it spent on the rollout of the network. Now, I think this is where the bargaining will come in. Because if you look at a lot of companies, when these licenses were given out, they had rollout conditions, for example. The government said, I want you to have a certain amount of your network.
Hang on. Okay. So this is where in the bargaining, the government, which in this case is, now the government has the upper hand, right? The government, if it chooses to shortchange Telenor, and I'm using the words carefully, I'm saying to shortchange Telenor, okay? That the government believes X is what should be given, but we're going to give Y, which is less than X. It can simply turn to the Supreme Court judgment as justification, right?
Well, it can turn to the Supreme Court judgment, but then Telenor can show other, that's where the lawyers come in and they say that, for example, this is covered under the bilateral investment treaty, the BIPA or something, so you have bilateral investment treaties. Enron, for example, had a dispute with the government of India, and finally it got settled in the arbitration process. They didn't complete the arbitration process, but the government of India
paid. So what you're saying is we are going to see as an outcome of an otherwise good judgment, a lot of huge mess taking place because guys will feel that they have got shafted for no fault of theirs.
And Omkar, in fact, what makes this more problematic is that immediately after the judgment came, the telecom minister Kapil Sibal had a press conference where he said, you guys got a problem, don't come to me, please go to the Supreme Court. I think that is an absurd statement to make. The problem that Telenor has is not with the Supreme Court. The problem which Telenor has is that there was a government of India issued paper. This was a paper that the government of India backed all along. In fact, till some weeks ago, Kapil Sibal kept saying there was no loss. That's how much the government was certain about the process. So the government is now suddenly saying that we're not going to pay. I think that's the frightening bit.
One quick question, and this is the last question. It indicts in some sense the Supreme Court, the PMO, and says nothing against the PM, but the PMO is only an office of the PM.
Yeah, it's a sort of strange distinction which the Supreme Court seems to have made, and I don't know why they've done it.
It's strange, and I don't understand why, but we've run out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. Till the next, see you.